My name is Samira. I'm 31 years old, and for a long time, I believed my worth depended on the gaze and approval of the man who controlled me. That man was my father. I grew up in a traditional, deeply devout Muslim family in a small town surrounded by desert sand. There, everyone knew our last name. My father was more than an authority figure. He was a sheikh, a spiritual leader respected, almost revered by many. When he entered the mosque, everyone stood in silence. His followers listened to his words with almost blind devotion, and inside the house, his voice was unquestionable. Not just a rule, it was as if his every command was an order from God himself. We lived in a gated compound, like a fortress. My father had 2 wives, many children, and such influence that even the police avoided him. From the outside, they seemed to admire us as a blessed family. Inside, we lived as captives of a distorted faith. During my childhood, I was considered one of the favorite daughters, the obedient daughter, always with her head bowed, her eyes on the ground, never daring to look a man in the eye. I knew the prayers, I knew the rules. I was shy and submissive, everything expected of me. But inside, there was a restlessness I couldn't explain, a hunger that wasn't physical, though many nights I went without food after the guests had eaten the best. It was something deeper, an emptiness that not even prayers or Quran recitations could fill. I missed being truly seen, not as just another daughter among so many siblings, not as a cog in the machine of my father's reputation. I wanted to be recognized as someone unique. I vividly remember being 13 and sneaking up to the terrace at night. The sky seemed so distant, but I would speak to it anyway. "You up there? Do you see me? Do you care? Or are you just counting how many rules I break?" There was never an answer, only the silence of the stars. By the time I reached my 20s, I was already shouldering heavy responsibilities at home. I was practically the manager of household affairs for my father's second wife, who was young and still inexperienced. I cooked for gatherings, organized meals on visiting days, and knew every unspoken gesture, every invisible protocol that guided our routine. In our culture, the expected destiny for a daughter was marriage, and the better the husband, the greater the honor for the family. But my father never showed any signs of looking for someone for me. In my naivete, I thought it was out of respect, perhaps because he believed I wasn't yet ready. But in truth, there was something darker brewing. Everything changed one ordinary evening, right after Isha prayers. I was called into his office. I entered with my eyes lowered, as I had learned, without raising my head, waiting for instructions. He called me by name, Samira, and there was a strange softness in his voice, something that confused me. He said I had always been obedient, faithful, pure, devoted. I nodded shyly, not understanding where this was going. Then he leaned back in his chair and said something that paralyzed me inside. "I have chosen you for myself. You will be my wife." My entire body froze. I thought I had heard wrong. "Your wife," I repeated, almost silently, my voice trembling. He smiled, as if he had said something beautiful. He explained that the Prophet had special permissions, and that, as a sheikh, he had too. "This is halal before Allah," he said. "You will live with more honor than any other woman in this city." I felt my legs weaken. He opened the Quran and began quoting passages about submission, about honor, about the blessing of being close to a man of God. But I could barely hear. It was as if the sounds around me had disappeared. Everything became a buzz. My vision blurred. My chest felt heavy. The daughter within me wanted to scream, "You are my father." The Muslim I was raised to be was terrified, unsure if this was truly God's will or a distortion created to justify the unthinkable. And the woman, the simple woman within me, felt her world crumble. Something inside me broke that night. The man I had feared and obeyed my entire life was no longer just my father. He was now trying to take ownership of my body, invoking God's name to legitimize his abuse. And within that closed world, no one would ever dare confront him, because to everyone else, he was the holy man. But to me, in that moment, he became the oppressor I needed to escape. My mother, no, she couldn't help me. She was my father's first wife and feared him as much as I feared him. She learned too early that silence was safer than any attempt at resistance. I never saw love between them, only obedience and distance. My brothers? Neither. They were raised within the same rigid and terrifying logic, that a sheikh's word was sacred, unquestionable, equal to God's. They saw my father as a divine intermediary, and to question him would be to defy Allah himself. When I left his office that night, my feet carried me automatically outside, but my soul seemed to have remained behind, shattered. I didn't say a single word. The night was silent, but inside me, the noise was deafening. It was as if my heart had been split in half, between fear and disbelief. And if you're listening to this now and wondering how something like this could happen, I tell you honestly, it can. It happens, more than you imagine. And women like me, for centuries, have lived in this silence that kills slowly. I need to say this urgently. If this story has reached you, if it has somehow touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Speak up. Leave a comment. Subscribe. Make this message resonate. Not because of numbers, likes, or followers, but because right now, somewhere in the world, maybe even right next to you, there is a woman sitting in a room like the one I was in, feeling completely alone, feeling that no one will ever believe her. Maybe your simple act of sharing will be the spark of hope she needs. Because what happened to me is not just a story of pain, it is also the story of a God who saw me, even when I thought I was invisible. A God who entered my darkness when all I felt was abandonment. This is a story of abuse, yes, but much more than that. It is the story of how I was found when I thought I was lost forever. There are nights we never forget, no matter how hard we try. Nights when the air seems heavier, when every shadow seems alive, as if watching our steps. The night it all came true was one of those. 2 weeks had passed since that conversation in the office, when my father announced that I would be his wife. 14 days lived as if I were in a bad dream, or rather, a nightmare that refused to end. I continued cooking, sweeping, helping with the household. On the outside, everything looked the same. Inside, every gesture was a silent countdown to something I didn't know how to stop. There was no engagement, no party, no choice. There was only my father's voice, the voice of authority, saying, "It is decided." That night, after prayers, he called me to his chambers. I remember how cold my hands were, how my legs barely supported me as I walked. I still harbored a small, foolish glimmer of hope. Maybe he's changed his mind. Maybe this was all a test. But the moment I walked into the room, I knew there was no going back. The strong scent of wood incense perfumed the room, making the air almost suffocating. Everything was perfectly arranged. The sheets were straightened, the pillows lined, 2 cups of tea steaming on the table. Beside them, dates were arranged with almost ceremonial precision. My father wore a spotless white robe, his beard carefully combed and oiled. His eyes watched me with an intensity I'd never seen before, and it wasn't the gaze of a father. When he gestured for me to sit, my feet stuck to the floor. Everything in me screamed for escape. "Samira," he said, his voice deeper and more controlled than ever. "Today we begin our life as husband and wife." At that moment, my stomach churned as if punched inside. I wanted to speak, scream, run. I wanted to say, "This is wrong. You're my father." But no words would come. The only thing I could mutter was, "Baba, please." And then came the final blow. He frowned and replied coldly, "Don't call me that anymore. Tonight, I am your husband." That sentence tore me apart. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was about to burst from my chest. He continued speaking as if nothing were wrong. He spoke of honor, of submission, and quoted hadith, stories of the Prophet. He said the Prophet married Zainab by Allah's command, and that he, as a spiritual leader, had the same right. He poured tea as if we were having an ordinary family conversation, and posed the cruel question, "Do you think you are more righteous than the mothers of the believers?" Each word, each quote, was like a hammer closing the coffin of my freedom, crushing any remaining resistance I had. I remained silent, but inside, I begged God to save me. And then came the threat disguised as a teaching. If you resist, you are resisting Allah, and a woman who resists her husband will be cursed by the angels until dawn. At that moment, I understood something terrible. What was happening wasn't just a father's sin. It was the manipulation of an entire faith, twisted to justify abuse. The religion that had once taught me to fear God was now being used as a chain to keep me captive. The prison I lived in wasn't just walls. It was twisted verses and traditions, used to justify the unjustifiable. This wasn't just a crime. It was sacrilege. And I, at the center of it all, felt empty. But what I didn't yet know was that even there, even in that night of darkness, God was beginning to chart a path of escape, a path of rescue. That night, he dismissed the servants earlier than usual. He ordered my stepmother not to approach his chambers for any reason. With that, the last door between me and the world closed. I stood there, motionless, knowing that from that moment on, I was no longer just a prisoner of silence. I was captive to the will of a man who used God's name to justify the unthinkable. I won't describe in detail everything that happened that night, not because I'm afraid to speak, not because I'm ashamed, because it was never my fault, but because I want you to remember me not as a victim of what was done to me, but as someone rescued by a God who sees. What I can say is that when the adhan, the call to prayer, echoed through the city that early morning, something inside me had already died. My body still breathed, but my faith was in ruins. Since childhood, I'd heard that Islam was a religion of honor, especially for women. That if I were obedient to Allah, He would protect me. That men of faith, like my father, were sent by God, bearers of light and justice. But that early morning, lying silently beside the one who should have been my protector, not my oppressor, I finally allowed myself to ask the question I'd long tried to silence within myself. If this is God's will, is He truly good? For the first time, the words came from my heart like a ragged whisper, unanswered, and the lack of an answer hurt more than anything. The next morning, as if nothing had happened, I served tea to my father. He smiled before the others, calling me my beloved. In front of the community, I was still the sheikh's gracious daughter, but behind the scenes, I had been marked, not as a wife by choice, but as possession, property acquired by force. After that day, I went to my room, locked the door, and for the first time, prayed with words not found in the holy books, nor in the rituals I'd learned. It wasn't a memorized plea. It was a scream, a prayer made of pain and desperation. Face down on the floor and my heart in pieces, I cried and said, Allah, if you see me, if you truly care, then take me out of this, or take my life. The silence that returned was like a cold echo. Nothing happened, no answer, no sign, no peace. I think it was there that the first crack appeared in the walls that supported my faith. Not a visible rupture, but a small, almost imperceptible fissure. The kind of crack you try to ignore, but that, over time, turns into a collapse. Because admitting that perhaps the God I knew wasn't as I'd been taught was terrifying. If He wasn't the one to protect me, where could I run? And yet the truth is, cracks grow. And soon, everything began to crumble. Today, I understand that there are prisons that don't need locks or chains. Some of the cruelest are built with sacred words, family traditions, and the shame of those who dare question them. Mine was like that. It had no iron bars, but walls built with religious authority and fear. The man who should have been just my father was now also my jailer, and according to him, my husband. After that night, my already limited freedom was practically extinguished. As a daughter, I could at least visit my stepmother, accompany other women to the market, participate in family gatherings, albeit privately. But now, everything had changed. My father said it was for my honor, that I had been elevated, chosen for a special role. But in reality, I was hidden, locked away. The room became my cell. I couldn't leave without being completely covered from head to toe, and only accompanied by someone he trusted. Meals were brought to me. When guests were at home, even family, I was kept out of sight. Not even my brothers could see me anymore. It wasn't the seclusion of a beloved wife, it was the isolation of someone who wants to keep a secret. He controlled everything. What I said, who I spoke to, when I could go out, even my prayers were monitored. In the mosque, I sat among the women, eyes on the floor, hands clasped in my lap, silent, invisible. When the imam extolled obedient wives during his Friday sermons, I felt their eyes on me, full of admiration, ignoring the truth. They thought I was an example of purity, of devotion, and in a cruel way, that made it all the more unbearable. I've experienced humiliation so profound that, to this day, I lack words to describe it. Once, during a family gathering, my father's first wife, my mother, ordered tea. I, as always, went to serve it. I entered the room carrying the tray carefully, my heart heavy. It was a common moment, something I'd done dozens of times before. But on that occasion, my father looked at me with a smile and said, in front of everyone present, uncles, cousins, elders, this is my beloved wife. She serves me well. The room fell silent, a heavy, suffocating silence. Some looked away, others lowered their heads. No one said anything, and that silence hurt more than if someone had shouted, because then I understood. Everyone knew, and no one would do anything. A few men shifted uncomfortably at that family gathering, looking around, but none dared say anything, because no one, absolutely no one, questioned a sheikh. It was like trying to silence the very word of God, or so they said. After that day, the whispers began. In the women's rooms, in the stuffy hallways between the tea and the carpets, I heard the words poisoned by ignorance. She received a special honor. She was chosen. God must have favored her above the others. And I wanted to scream from the depths of my soul. This is no honor. This is a prison with golden walls. But I didn't scream, because in the world I lived in, silence wasn't just a choice. It was a matter of survival. Silence was the shield that kept me from disappearing completely. And so, at night, I lay with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, feeling the blankets over me like invisible chains. Each fold weighed like iron, and I prayed. Oh, how I prayed. 5 times a day, sometimes even more. I began to pray louder, more desperately, hoping that somehow my insistence would move God's heart. He bent my knees so hard I could barely walk afterward. I cried out to be seen, to be heard, to be set free. But the words bounced off the ceiling and bounced back like lifeless dust, falling on my face as a reminder that nothing was changing. There's something no one tells you about praying while imprisoned. Prayer can become a kind of madness. I began to repeat the same phrases over and over, hoping that maybe this time the heavens would open. I tried fasting more than necessary, as if physical pain were a bargaining chip with the divine. I rubbed mud on my skin, believing my impurity was what was keeping me from being saved. And when nothing happened, I began to wonder if God was really listening, or if he ever was. But the worst part, the cruelest of all, was pretending. I had to be the obedient daughter, the discreet wife, the devout woman my community expected me to be. I pretended in front of my stepmother, my other wives, my younger sisters, so they wouldn't know the terror that consumed me. I became an actress in my own life. My existence became a theater where I smiled on the outside and died on the inside. But no play lasts forever, and small cracks began to appear in the script. One ordinary afternoon, as I was cleaning the hallway near the main room, I overheard my father talking to another sheikh. They spoke like men who knew no one would ever confront them. They laughed shamelessly, commenting on how wives were possessions. They said the prophet's companions sometimes married their brothers' widows to preserve the family wealth. And then my father said, with pride in his voice, "Samira understands her place. She knows that obedience is her beauty." My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the tray. The sound of the metal hitting the floor was like thunder, but no one even came out of the room to see. That night, I locked my door and knelt on the rug, but for the first time, I didn't pray to Allah. Instead, with my forehead pressed to the floor and my eyes brimming with tears, I simply whispered, "Whoever you are, if you're there, please see me." That was all. A short phrase, almost nothing, but then something happened. For the first time, I didn't address a God with a name and rules. I spoke to someone, perhaps the true God, with my heart bare. The next day, my father brought me a gift, a gold bracelet. He said it was for my obedience, as if it were a reward. I put it on, and the cold metal on my wrist felt like a delicate handcuff. That gesture made me understand something clearly. Even his kindness was an extension of captivity. Everything was under control. My despair had become a deep sleep, but even there, God, the true God, was already moving, about to break through the walls of my prison in ways I could never have imagined. I remember it as if it were yesterday. It was late afternoon, and the house was shrouded in golden silence, bathed in soft sunlight streaming through the blinds. My father was at the mosque, as usual. The others were busy in the kitchen. It was the only time of day I could breathe. I was in his office, cleaning the dark wood shelves, as I did every week. My eyes fell on one of his oldest Qurans, the one he used to teach his disciples. It was larger, heavier, with a worn cover and pages marked from so many readings. Without thinking, I opened the book. I let the pages fall on their own, without a planned destination. They landed on a familiar section, Surah Al-Ahzab, chapter 33. I had read parts of it before, but never with tired eyes, never with a broken soul. And there, in verse 50, was the key to it all. "O Prophet, we permit you to take as wives women who offer themselves to you, those whom your right hand possesses, the wives of certain relatives. Special permissions, exclusive privileges, something no other man had." I read that verse again, more slowly, almost with fear. Each word felt like a knife opening an old wound within me. And in that moment, something inside me twisted, as if my soul were trying to escape what my eyes were seeing. Those words weren't strange to me. They were, in fact, familiar. I'd heard them from my father. He'd always maintained that, as a sheikh, a religious leader, he had rights other men didn't. He said Allah had given special permissions to men like him, that our union was a blessing, an honor other women would envy, that resisting would be the same as resisting God himself. And now, there, in the pages of the Quran I held with trembling hands, was that same justification. It wasn't an invention. It was written, like a divine seal approving everything that was destroying me. I closed the book with difficulty, as if each page weighed twice as much. My entire faith had been built on the idea that Islam protected women, that abuse came from men, not from religion. For years, I'd repeated this to myself like a mantra, to survive, to keep from breaking. But now, looking at that book, at those words, I realized that maybe it wasn't just men. The permission was there, recorded, accepted, proclaimed. I sat on the floor, my back against the cold wooden shelves, my heart racing and my mind spinning. I whispered, almost unconsciously, "Hello, is that what you are?" The room responded with a thick, suffocating silence. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was the absence of meaning, the absence of God. I remembered my mother's unshed tears, the way she endured everything without complaint, believing it was her sacred duty. I remembered the women in our community, their dull gazes, their hunched shoulders, living in forced marriages, accepting polygamy, enduring abandonment, all in the name of faith, all with the same justifications I had just read. For the first time, I didn't question my father. I questioned God. And that was the question that terrified me the most. Have I been wrong all along? Because if this God was truly the author of my pain, he was no better than the man who had imprisoned me. And as much as I tried to push that thought away, it lingered deep within me, like an unspoken blasphemy that echoed nonetheless. The fear of offending a powerful God made me expect immediate punishment, a lightning strike, a breakdown, something. But nothing happened, and that hurt even more. Because even when I questioned him, he remained silent. I kept that question inside me like a hidden splinter. I didn't tell my stepmother, who continued to live in silence as if nothing were wrong. I didn't tell my younger sisters because I wanted to protect them. I didn't dare speak about it in the women's section of the mosque, where everything was rules, appearances, and blind devotion. But even hidden, that doubt pierced me every day, an invisible wound that bled whenever I took a deep breath. And then came another night of deceit and anguish. My father asked me to serve tea to a guest, another sheikh, visiting from a neighboring town. I stood there, tray in hand, listening to them talk about male leadership, about the need to keep women in line. They used verses as weapons. They laughed at the idea that a woman could know her own worth. And once again, I heard that phrase, "And if a believing woman offers herself to the prophet." Before, it had sounded like sanctity, but now it sounded like license, like sanctified abuse. That night, when I went to bed, I didn't kneel as I had before. I didn't repeat the verses. I didn't turn my face toward Mecca, because at that point, I no longer knew to whom I was praying. For the first time, I admitted to myself, "I don't know who you are, and I don't know if I want to know anymore." But in the darkness, without form, without ritual, without courage, I whispered, "If you are real, if you are good, show yourself, because I can't take it anymore." And now I know, that was my first real prayer, not to a religion, not to a set of rules, but to someone. I didn't know his name yet, but he heard. And it was that prayer, born of my rawest desperation, that began to break the silence that had enveloped me for 31 years. I don't know if you've ever been in a place so dark that even existence itself begins to feel too heavy. I've been there, in that place where the breath is gone, not from lack of air, but from too much pain, where life no longer feels like a gift, but a sentence. The weight of what my father imposed on me, God's silence, the doubt that corroded my faith like acid, everything pressed down on me until I could no longer breathe. It was a night like any other. Isha's Adhan had been chanted. The compound was silent. The lights dimmed, as if the house, too, were exhausted. And there, in that stillness, something was about to happen. Something that would change my entire life. I sat alone in the room, the silence as heavy as the air itself. The only light came from the dim lamp in the corner, casting a yellow circle on the floor, as if even the light were afraid to expand. My eyes fell on the gold bracelet my father had given me days before. It was supposed to symbolize honor, obedience, reward. But there, against my skin, it burned like a hot iron. It was as if it screamed what I tried to ignore. "You are property. You are possession." I removed it with a quick, almost impatient movement, like ripping off a chain. I placed it on the table, not as if guarding something precious, but as if returning a prison. And right there, I whispered, my voice breaking, "No, just that." A no that was not just for the present, but for everything. For the God who couldn't see me, for the silence that consumed me, for the life I was told was destiny. If you are there, if you are real, if you see me, please, please, come. At some point, I lost consciousness. I don't know if it was exhaustion, despair, or the prayer finally breaking something, but it wasn't an ordinary sleep. It was different, deep, as if I'd passed through an invisible portal. I was in a vast desert, an endless void. The ground was pale sand, and the sky was covered in a silvery light that wasn't blinding, but wasn't welcoming either. There was a dense, heavy silence, as if the whole world were holding its breath. I looked down. My feet were bare. My abaya was torn, dirty, fluttering like rags around my body. I felt small, weak, stripped of all dignity. And then I saw him. In the distance, a man walked toward me. He was dressed in white, but not ordinary white. It was a vivid, pulsating white, as if the light itself had made the garment. The light around him didn't come from the sun. It came from within him. Each step was calm, steady, charged with purpose. My heart began to beat faster, but not with fear. There was something about this man that made me feel safe, as if his mere presence said, "You are safe now." When he finally came close, he didn't speak. He just looked me in the eye. And in that look, I knew. He saw me. Not as property, not as a sheikh's daughter, not as a wife against my will. He saw the 13-year-old girl who looked at the stars on the terrace, the 31-year-old woman who no longer believed in anything. He saw every uncried tear, every stifled plea, every word I didn't dare say. Then he spoke, his voice soft, yet full of authority, like the sound of truth. "You are not a possession, you are mine." It went through me like thunder, but at the same time, like water in the desert. The words made no religious sense to me at the time. I didn't understand all the theology. I didn't grasp the exact meaning, but I knew, deep in my soul, that it was true. I knelt, unable to stand. The tears came like rain, loose, heavy, liberating. I tried to ask who he was, but I could barely speak. I just whispered between sobs, "Who are you?" He smiled. It wasn't a smile of pity, like men sometimes give to broken women. It was a smile full of love, pure love, love that doesn't demand, love that doesn't hurt. And he said, "I am the one who has always seen you." Those words shattered me, because no one has ever truly seen me, not as I was, but he had. Then he held out his hand. When I held it, I didn't just feel warmth. I felt life, real life. A wave coursed through my body, piercing not only my skin, but also the wounds no one else could see. The pain didn't disappear, but for the first time, I wasn't alone in it. And it was in that moment that I woke up. I returned to the room. The lamp still cast its yellow circle on the floor. The world looked the same, but I knew it wasn't. My face was wet with tears, and my heart beat differently. There was something new there, something silent but firm, as if a seed had been planted amid the rubble of my faith. The weight of the pain was still there, but there was something underneath, supporting it. A foundation where before there had been only sand. The next morning, I waited until the house was empty. I went to my stepmother's closet and found an old, still-working phone. I went online with trembling fingers and typed, "Muslim woman dreaming of a man dressed in white." I wasn't prepared for what I found. Hundreds of stories began to appear. Syria, Iran, Egypt, Lebanon, Indonesia, Somalia, real-life testimonies. Men and women like me, devout Muslims who had dreamed of a man dressed in white. They all described the same look, the same words. "You are mine." And they all said the same name, Jesus. My heart raced. I knew Isa, the Isa of the Quran. I had always been told he was just a prophet, someone respectable but human. Never divine, never the Son of God, never someone to pray to. But there was something in the stories I read, something that ignited hope deep within me. It was as if I were hearing a song my spirit had always wanted to sing but never knew the melody. I kept reading, watching videos of ex-Muslims, listening to their trembling but joyful voices. They spoke of a peace they had never experienced before, of a love that didn't need to be earned, of a savior who came to them when no one else could. That night, I lay in bed with my heart pounding. For the first time, I dared to say his name quietly, Jesus. The word sounded strange on my tongue, but not in my heart. If it was you, if you're real, please come back. I want to know you. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if anyone would hear me, but something inside me told me I was no longer alone, because someone had found me in the deepest darkness and called me theirs. I thought I was being careful. I swore to myself no one would ever know. Every time I picked up my stepmother's old cell phone, I did it with the doors locked, my ears open, my heart racing. That afternoon, I was completely absorbed in a video. It was the testimony of a woman from Yemen, a former Muslim like me, who had also dreamed of the man in white. She spoke with tears in her eyes about how Jesus had found her, healed her wounds, and given her a new life. Her words pierced me like true arrows. For the first time, someone was putting into words what I was feeling. I was so immersed in the testimony that I didn't notice the sound of the door opening. When I looked up, my younger brother was already inside the room. He looked straight at the phone in my hands. My heart leaped into my throat. Panicked, I tried to lock the screen, turn the device around, hide it. But it was too late. "What are you watching?" he asked. His eyes narrowed. My voice trailed off. "It's just a story," I murmured. But he walked over, grabbed the phone from my hand, and with a few taps, the video started from the beginning. There was the woman again, talking about the Bible, about Isa al-Masih, calling him Lord and Savior. My brother's face hardened. "You're watching Christian lies." And before I could explain or say anything, he ran out, screaming for my father with a rage that seemed greater than he was. The house became a battlefield. My father came in screaming, his cell phone trembling in his hand. His eyes burned like live coals. "What abomination is this?" he roared. "It's nothing, Baba, I swear." I couldn't finish my sentence. The slap came like a thunderstorm, sharp, without warning. I fell to the floor from the impact, tasting blood in my mouth. My brother locked the door from the outside at my father's command. I heard him pick up the phone and call the local imam, then two of my uncles. Within an hour, 3 men were inside my room. My father, my oldest uncle, and the imam. The air was heavy, dense, filled with judgment. The imam sat across from me with a grave expression and said, "Samira, we hear you're heeding the whispers of Shaitan." I shook my head, terrified. "No, I just wanted to understand." My father huffed angrily. The imam began reciting verses from the Quran in a low voice, then sprinkled water on me as if driving out something evil. He pressed his hand hard against my forehead and declared, "She's been taken by a jinn. That's what's leading her astray." I wanted to scream, to say, "It's not a jinn, it's Jesus." But I didn't dare. My throat was dry, my body trembling. They said I was mentally fragile, spiritually in danger. They forbade me from touching any cell phone, computer, or book other than the Quran. They said they would do this out of love, to protect me. But love that locks doors and closes windows is never love. I spent the next few days trapped inside my room. The window was jammed, the doorknob on the outside with a key. Meals were scarce, brought in silence, and left on the floor. The first night, I cried nonstop. The second night, I had no tears left. And then, something changed. On the third night, I knelt on the ground, with no direction toward Mecca, no words in Arabic. I simply closed my eyes and whispered, "Jesus, I know almost nothing about you, but I know you saw me. I know you called me yours. Please, don't leave me now." The prayer was simple, but something about it opened a space within me. I heard no voices, no light shone, but the fear that had always controlled me loosened. The shame that had always enveloped me retreated a little. For the first time, locked there, alone, I felt a presence. Peace. Small, but real. My father thought the lock on the door would prevent me from following Jesus, but he didn't understand that in that cell I had already begun to belong to another. And this new master didn't need to imprison me. He set me free, even within the walls. By the third day, my body was already weak from the scant food, but my spirit was more alive than ever. I knew, if I had the chance, even if it cost me everything, I would choose Jesus. This chance would come sooner than I imagined. On the 4th day, as the sun was beginning to set, I heard a knock. It wasn't loud. It was a soft, rhythmic tap, almost fearful. I approached the door silently. Then I heard, "Get lost, it's Isla." The whisper was familiar. Isla was our neighbor. Over the years, she had always been kind to me. She would give me pieces of warm bread from her oven when she saw I was last in line. Sometimes she would leave sprigs of fresh mint on my window with notes saying, "For your tea." She was a simple woman, but with a look of compassion in her eyes. In that moment, with just my name whispered on the other side of the door, I knew something was about to change. I barely knew anything about Ila's life. She'd always been that quiet neighbor, her face covered, her gaze gentle but distant. We'd never exchanged more than a few polite words. But in that moment, with her whispering on the other side of the locked door, everything changed. I approached the door slowly, almost in disbelief. "How do you know I'm here?" I whispered back, my heart hammering in my chest. On the other side, she replied firmly, unafraid, "I heard the screams, and I know what they think you did." After a brief silence, her voice softened. "Samira, I'm a Christian, and I can help you get out." My breath caught. Never in my life had anyone said those words with such simplicity and courage. I'm a Christian. Whenever I'd heard that name, it had been laden with contempt, with warning, with judgment. But now it came with compassion, with a promise, with a way out. My heart was pounding as if it wanted to escape before me. But what if they catch you? I asked, my voice trembling. I know the risks, she replied. But you prayed, didn't you? You asked for help. He's answering, and I'm just part of that. That same night, when the house was shrouded in silence and shadows, Illa returned. She slid a small piece of wire under the door with precise hands. It's for the lock, she whispered urgently. I trembled all over, not just from my inexperienced hands trying to unlock a door, but from the enormity of what I was about to do. A click echoed louder than any thunder in the house. I froze, but then I pushed the door open slowly and stepped outside. The hallway felt like a sea of invisible eyes. Every shadow could hide a danger. I grabbed nothing. No clothing, no belongings, no memories. I just took with me my ragged breath, my fear, and my resolve. Ila moved with precision, as if she'd mapped every corner of that darkness years ago. She led me through the backyard to a small gate hidden among the bushes, a gate I hadn't even known existed. It opened onto a narrow, dirty but open alley. And at that moment, that alley was more beautiful than any garden. The air outside was thick, but different. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was her direction. We walked quickly, silently, like shadows crossing the night. When we reached Illa's house, she gave me water, fresh bread, and a simple blanket. I sat on the living room floor, still unable to understand if all of this was real. Then she knelt before me. Her eyes were serious, firm, but full of tenderness. Samira, she said, before anything, I need to ask you, do you want to follow him? Not just run away from your father? Not just escape fear? Do you want to give your life to Jesus, the only one who can truly save you? Tears blinded me. I thought of the dream, of the man in white, of the voice that said, "You are mine." It was him. I knew. And in that moment, my heart screamed louder than my fears. Yes, I whispered. Yes, even if it costs me everything, even my life. Illa smiled, her eyes brimming with tears. She took my hands firmly and began to pray. I didn't understand all the words, but each one seemed to ignite something inside me, a fire, a warmth that burned not on the outside, but on the inside. When she finished, I closed my eyes and said my own prayer. No script, no rituals, just me and him. Jesus, I believe you are real, that you came to me. I give you my life. I am yours. There was no thunder, no voices from heaven, just a peace so deep, so firm, so immense. It felt like home itself. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was home, even without knowing where I was. And in that moment, everything changed. The soul that had once belonged to a man now belonged to the King of Kings. Later that night, Illa made contact with a secret group linked to an underground church. In the middle of the night, we were taken to a meeting point. A man named Yusuf was there. He didn't say much. He just opened the car door and drove. During the trip, no one spoke. But every kilometer seemed to free another piece of my soul. I knew I couldn't go back. Never again. It wasn't just my home I was leaving behind. It was everything I had been up until that point. A sheikh's daughter, a voiceless woman, a Muslim by obligation. Now, I was something completely new, a follower of Jesus. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know where I would sleep the next day. But I knew one thing. I had chosen it. And even if everything fell apart, even if the whole world turned against me, I wouldn't turn back. I thought it would take some time for my family to find out where I was, but it didn't take long. A week after the escape, I was in a simple shelter, an old apartment with peeling paint on the walls, the smell of stale bread and dry tea in the air. I was sitting by the window, watching the cloudy sky, when Ila came in. She was holding her cell phone in her hands, her fingers tightly clasped. Her face held something I couldn't yet name, but I knew immediately something had happened. "Samira," she said softly, her voice filled with care and sadness. "You need to know, they declared you dead." My throat tightened so much it felt like I couldn't speak anymore. Ila handed me the phone and I stared at the screen with trembling hands. It was a screenshot of a WhatsApp group chat from our community, and my father's words leaped out at me, cold and hard as a sentence. "My daughter Samira is no longer part of this family. She is dead to us. May Allah judge her." I read it twice, in disbelief. Dead. I was already buried to him. My name, my place in the family, everything I had ever known simply vanished, as if it had never existed. I handed the phone back to Ila, trying to control the tears and the trembling in my hands. I thought this would hurt more, I said, my voice breaking. She looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to teach me something important. Sometimes, she said slowly, the cut is so deep that we don't even feel it at the time. It's only later that it really starts to hurt. That night, I lay on the thin mattress in the safe house, staring at the cracked ceiling above me. I spent the entire night remembering the times my father had called me the pride of the family, the obedient daughter everyone praised. And now I was nothing, just an absence, a name erased. But in the silence of that cold room, another voice came to my mind, the man in white, that gaze that saw everything in me, that voice that said, "You are mine." The next day, Layla took me to see the underground church where I would begin my new life. It wasn't what I'd imagined. No grand buildings, no cathedral with stained glass windows, just a simple living room where 12 people gathered in a circle, their faces lit by a different glow, a joy I'd never seen in the mosque or at home. When I entered, no one looked at me with suspicion or pity. They smiled, as if they had been waiting for me for a long time. An older woman, her hands scarred from hard work, hugged me tightly and whispered in my ear, "Welcome home, daughter. Daughter of God, not a servant, not a possession, not a disgrace. Daughter." There, in that small room, I heard the pastor talk about baptism, about dying to the past and being reborn into a new life. Instantly, I knew I needed this, that I wanted this. A few days later, they filled a plastic tub with ice-cold water. I stepped in slowly, feeling the cold cutting into the skin of my feet. The pastor smiled kindly at me. "Samira, would you like to choose a new name to mark this new life that begins in Christ?" I thought for a moment, and then answered in a firm voice, "Miriam. It means desire to have a child." He nodded with a smile. "Miriam, through your faith in Jesus Christ, we baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." As I was submerged in the water, I felt the weight of all my father's harsh words, the shame, and the captivity sink in with me. And when I emerged, a lightness washed over me, like the first breath after a long time underwater. They wrapped me in a soft towel, and someone read aloud a verse that resonated strongly within me, John 8:36. "So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed." That verse covered me like a protective cloak. For the first time, I truly believed. My family had erased me, but God had written my name in his eternal book. My father rejected me, but my heavenly Father took me to himself. I was Miriam now, and I was free. Many people think that freedom is a complete leap into the light, a sudden escape from the shadows. But the truth is that freedom always carries the scent of the prison you left behind. Even after my baptism, I would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart racing, expecting to hear my father's footsteps outside the door. I was still startled by the sound of keys in the lock. I dreamed of the house compound, its high walls and gates that closed with a loud bang. And sometimes, amidst the silence, I could still hear his voice echoing in my head. "You are mine. You will obey." The scars of the past weren't just etched in my memory. They lived in every fiber of my being. A simple, abrupt gesture from someone near me would make my body shiver, as if ready to protect itself. My chest tightened when the call to prayer echoed from the distant mosque, bringing a mix of longing and fear. It was as if every sound, every shadow, carried a piece of that life I was trying to leave behind. I needed, more than ever, to relearn what true safety meant, something I'd believed impossible for so long, and some days, even that safety seemed too distant for me to reach. The safe house where I was staying became my new normal, a simple place, a small room I shared with another woman named Nadia. She too had her own story of escape, her own fears and pain. Together, we shared secrets at night, speaking softly like children hiding under the covers to share forbidden confidences. Nadia told me something that stuck with me. Fear never completely disappears, but love grows and takes its place. In that moment, I clung to that hope with all my strength. I became increasingly involved with the underground church. That community wasn't just a group that talked about Jesus. They lived what they taught. They cooked for the sick, prayed for each other using each other's names, and cried together when pain gripped someone's heart. Slowly, their love began to unravel the knots of lies I'd carried since childhood. One day, during Bible study, we read Psalm 34:18. "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." At that moment, I couldn't hold back the tears. My spirit was so overwhelmed that those words felt like a balm to my soul. It was then that I began writing in a small notebook I carried with me. Whenever the old fear threatened to return, I searched for a verse that would conquer it. When my father's voice whispered in my mind, I wrote, "I have called you by name. You are mine. Isaiah 43:1. When shame tried to suffocate me, I wrote, "There is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus." Romans 8:1. These words became my medicine, my daily strength. But the healing I sought wasn't just for me. Little by little, I began sharing my story with other women who were also hidden, trapped in their own silent prisons. We did this subtly, in whispered conversations, coded messages, and even handwritten notes we left hidden under doors. Many weren't yet ready to embrace faith in Jesus, but they all drew closer when I spoke of the man in white, the one who saw beyond the walls and the lies. I told them, "He sees you. You have not been forgotten." I still lived carefully, hiding my real name in public, avoiding neighborhoods that might put me at risk. There were days when I missed them so much, especially my youngest daughter and my brothers, thinking of them, knowing I might never see them again. But when the urge to return arose, I remembered the darkness I left behind and the light that found me within it. I carry the scars, yes. I still feel the fire of that pain, that struggle, but I know that fire can both destroy and purify. Today, I am free. Not because my past has disappeared, it is with me always, but because Jesus entered that past and transformed it, taking me as his daughter. If someone had told me years ago that one day I would be sitting here, free and calling myself a child of God, I would have laughed. Or maybe, I would have cried, because for much of my life, I believed I belonged to a man, my father. For a long time, I thought I belonged to a distant God who turned a blind eye while I suffered. But now, I know better. I am not my father's property. I am not a sheikh's wife, nor the shame of my family. I am the daughter of the King of Kings. When I first read Psalm 68:5, "A father to the fatherless and defender of widows is God in his holy habitation," I felt those words were written for me, for my pain, for my rebirth. I had lost my earthly father, not through death, but through betrayal. And in his place, God himself intervened. The king I now belong to is completely different from the man who ruled my childhood. My king does not use fear to control me. He does not hide me in shame or demand my silence to preserve a false reputation. My king calls me by my name. He walks with me in the light. He clothes me with honor. And when he says, "You are mine," it is not a possession. It is a love that sets me free. I think a lot about that night I left. How I left everything behind with nothing, without family, without possessions, without any certainty about what tomorrow might bring. I was literally stripped of everything I had ever known as security or identity. And yet, in that emptiness, I gained something I never imagined possible. I gained a profound peace, one that doesn't depend on external circumstances or a safe place. I gained a joy that blossoms even amidst life's storms, a light that shines despite the shadows around me. I gained a hope that no one, not even the worst situations, can ever take from me. Because when Jesus finds you, he breaks the chains that bound you, so that there is no return to the prisons of the past. I won't lie and say that following Jesus was an easy path. I paid a high price. I lost my family, my home, and the life I thought was my destiny. But along with it, I received something I could never have planned or expected. A new family, made up of brothers and sisters who love me unconditionally, a heavenly Father who never abandons me, and a future no one can erase or destroy. That's why I share my story, not to spark compassion, but because I know that somewhere in this world, a woman is trapped right now, in a dark room, feeling alone and desperate. I know there are men who still use God's name to justify abuse, to keep others trapped in fear and shame. And I know there are people who read the Bible and, instead of finding hope, find doubt, wondering if God is truly good. To all of these people, I want to say, yes, he is good. But maybe you need to find him outside the walls you've always known, away from the prisons that try to imprison you. If you've made it this far and heard my story, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And if anything I've said touched your soul, please don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Share it so another woman, somewhere, can hear about the man in white who sees her. Share it so someone lost in the darkness knows there is light. Share it so the silence cries out the name of that God who hears and answers. I left that life as a sheikh's wife, but today I live as a daughter of the King of Kings. I was once marked by sin and rejection, but today I am claimed by God's unconditional love. I was once a promise made by the will of a man. Now I am a promise made by the sovereign grace of my Heavenly Father. And if he could find me, if he could reach me, I believe with all my heart that he can reach you too. I leave you with the words that have become the anthem of my new life, the truth that has transformed everything for me. Therefore, if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. John 8:36. I am truly free.